Clint Eastwood vanished. For over a year, the Hollywood legend was nowhere to be seen. No red carpets, no interviews, not even a quiet appearance at his favorite golf tournament. The one held just minutes from his home. For fans who'd followed him for decades, it felt like the end. Rumors started swirling. Had the icon finally stepped away for good? Was something wrong? At 93, most people assumed he'd quietly faded out. But then, without warning, Clint Eastwood came back, and not just a wave at cameras. He returned with a look nobody expected, a project nobody saw coming, and a message that made one thing crystal clear: Clint Eastwood isn't finished. In February of 2022, Clint Eastwood made what looked like a routine appearance at the AT&T Pro-Am golf tournament, something he'd been showing up to for years. It wasn't just a celebrity drop-in. This event was personal. Held just minutes from his home in Carmel, California, it had become one of the few public places where fans could still catch a glimpse of him in recent years. At the time, no one thought twice. He looked older, yes, more frail than before, but he smiled, waved, and watched the game. Business as usual, or so it seemed. But after that, nothing. Month after month went by. No new photos, no press, not even a blurry sighting from a fan in town. People started noticing. By the time 2023 rolled around, the concern had turned into full-blown anxiety. He didn't show up to that year's tournament, a huge red flag, especially since his son, Scott Eastwood, was competing. For a man who had always been a hands-on father and a supportive presence, the absence was hard to ignore. Speculation exploded online. Was Clint battling a serious illness? Had he quietly retired for good? Was something being covered up? Some feared the worst, that he'd passed away privately and the family was keeping it under wraps. After all, he was 93. Even for someone with his legendary toughness, time eventually catches up, and the silence made it worse. No statements from family, no insider reports, no subtle hints to ease the worry. For over 450 days, Clint Eastwood, one of the most famous faces in the world, might as well have been invisible. It was eerie, even haunting, to think that the man who had once defined rugged American masculinity could simply vanish without a trace. But Clint Eastwood's story was never going to end with silence, because just when everyone thought they'd seen the last of him, he reappeared, and it caught everyone completely off guard. It happened quietly. No press tour, no dramatic entrance, just a few snapshots taken at a conservation event in May 2023, and suddenly Clint Eastwood was back. After more than 450 days out of the public eye, the man everyone thought might never be seen again showed up at a Jane Goodall fundraiser in Carmel by the Sea, just a stone's throw from where he lives. The images that surfaced online stunned everyone. Clint looked older, yes, but not defeated. He had longer, silver hair and a rugged beard that gave him the air of a weathered cowboy who just walked out of the desert. He smiled. He laughed. He chatted with guests like someone who had never been gone at all. People didn't know what to make of it. Was this a brief return? A final goodbye? Or was it a quiet message to the world that Clint Eastwood still had something left in the tank? The way he carried himself told you everything you needed to know. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't sick. He wasn't done. And then came the real shock, the part no one expected. Reports started trickling in that Eastwood wasn't just making public appearances. He was working. Behind the camera, directing. At 93 years old. While most people at that age are resting or being cared for, Eastwood was back on a movie set, fully engaged, calling the shots on his latest project. And this wasn't some vanity piece to keep his name in the credits. This was a serious film with a major cast and a real story. A courtroom thriller titled Juror Number 2. Photos emerged from the Georgia set, showing Clint on location, deep in focus, surrounded by cast and crew. According to insiders, he wasn't just there to lend his name. He was fully in control, choosing angles, coaching performances, watching scenes play back with that same intensity he's always been known for. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess this was a man in his 90s. It was like watching history in motion, a living legend still doing what he loves with the same quiet fire that built his career. In a world where most people fade out, Clint Eastwood reemerged with more purpose than ever. And just like that, he reminded everyone, he's not a relic from the past. He's still writing the final chapter, and it's far from over. Clint Eastwood doesn't just show up, he takes command. When news broke that he was directing a new film, Juror Number 2, most people assumed he'd be doing it from a chair in the background, maybe giving a few pointers here and there. But those who saw him on set in Georgia knew better. Clint wasn't just present, he was locked in, walking the set with quiet intensity, reviewing every shot, giving actors direction with the kind of precision that only comes from a lifetime behind the camera. Crew members said he still had the same unshakable presence, the same no-nonsense style. No yelling, no chaos, just a firm, focused vision. And people listened. The film itself isn't a throwaway project, either. Juror Number 2 is a legal thriller with real stakes, the kind of story Clint gravitates toward later in his career. Introspective, morally complicated, and grounded in character. The kind of film where what's said in silence matters just as much as the dialogue. Starring Nicholas Hoult and Toni Collette, the project follows a juror who realizes he may have caused the victim's death. It's classic Eastwood, a man pulled between duty, guilt, and personal truth. And it might just be his final film, giving the whole production an added layer of gravity. There's a quiet symbolism in it all. A 93-year-old man directing a story about conscience, consequence, and redemption. Clint has always been drawn to these themes, especially in his later years. But this time, the urgency feels different. Not forced, not sentimental, just real. He's not trying to chase relevance or cash in on nostalgia. He's doing what he's always done, telling stories that matter in the way only he can. And maybe that's the most remarkable part. In an industry obsessed with youth, with reboots and remakes, Clint Eastwood is still here. Not recycling the past, but building something new. Not coasting on his name, but earning it every day. At an age where most are barely surviving, Clint is still creating, still leading, still leaving his mark. Because for Clint Eastwood, legacy isn't something you reflect on, it's something you keep building right up until the very end. Before he was a Hollywood legend, Clint Eastwood was just a kid from a struggling family, bouncing from town to town during the Great Depression. His father could never seem to hold a job for long, and by the time Clint was in high school, he'd already learned how to adapt to constant change. But it wasn't just financial instability that shaped him, it was the feeling that he had to carve his own path, because nobody was going to do it for him. That mindset followed him into every stage of his life, and it may be the single biggest reason he's still standing today. One of the most defining moments of Clint's life came in 1951, when he was drafted into the Army during the Korean War. Most people don't know this, but Clint Eastwood shouldn't have survived that year. On a flight back to base, the plane he was hitching a ride on lost power, ran out of fuel, and went down off the coast of California. He wasn't some war hero on the battlefield. He was a swimming instructor by trade, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The aircraft ditched in the ocean. The back door had already blown off mid-flight. Radios were down. The pilot was panicking. Clint had to inflate a life raft and swim through freezing, shark-infested waters. Some say up to 4 miles, just to survive. He battled exhaustion, hallucinations, and pure chaos before finally stumbling onto shore. That kind of experience doesn't leave you. It changes you, and it showed up in his work for the rest of his life. Years later, he starred in Escape from Alcatraz, playing a man who swam to freedom through the icy San Francisco Bay. It wasn't just acting, it was something Clint had already lived through. He wasn't playing a survivor, he was one. Even after the plane crash, life didn't cut him any slack. Early in his acting career, Clint battled anxiety so severe it nearly derailed everything. He was a nervous wreck behind the scenes, sleepless nights, panic attacks, and yet, somehow, he never let the public see it. He learned to channel that fear into focus, to master his own storm. Then came the heartbreak of losing his father, a moment that shook him to the core and changed the way he viewed health, family, and mortality. All of it, the near-death experience, the childhood instability, the internal battles, it forged something unbreakable in him. Clint Eastwood didn't become a legend because he was lucky. He became one because he refused to break. And even now, decades later, that same grit is written all over his face. It's not just in the movies, it's in the man. At 93 years old, Clint Eastwood isn't just alive. He's active, alert, and and still directing feature films. For most people, that kind of longevity feels impossible. But Clint didn't get here by chance. He got here through quiet discipline, ruthless self-control, and a lifestyle shaped by both tragedy and intention. After losing his father to cardiovascular disease at just 63, Clint made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't go out the same way. And from that moment on, everything changed. While the Hollywood stereotype leaned into indulgence and excess, Clint went in the opposite direction. No smoking, no drinking, no late-night parties. Instead, he focused on clean living, maintaining a low-fat, high-protein diet for decades. He didn't just cut back on junk food, he eliminated it. Friends say he's always been conscious of what goes into his body, reading labels, tracking cholesterol, and staying miles ahead of health issues before they ever started. But food was only part of it. Clint kept moving, even when the cameras weren't rolling. He's been lifting weights since his 20s, doing cardio into his 70s, and walking daily well into his 90s. It's not about vanity for him, it's survival. He's always said staying active isn't optional, it's necessary. That mindset rubbed off on his son Scott, who's now an actor in his own right. Scott has credited his father as the reason he started training young, lifting weights as a teen, and living with purpose. Clint didn't just give his kids advice, he modeled it. And then there's the mental side, maybe the most underrated part of his longevity. Clint Eastwood has always stayed curious, always stayed creative. Even when he wasn't acting, he was directing. When he wasn't directing, he was writing music, producing, or reading scripts. His mind never stopped working. And in a world where most people mentally check out by retirement, Clint never saw aging as a reason to slow down. If anything, he saw it as motivation to do more. That combination, physical health, emotional control, and creative engagement, is rare. And Clint's never preached it. He just lived it, quietly, relentlessly. It's why, when people ask how he's still going, there's no magic answer, no gimmick, just decades of small, disciplined choices that added up to something bigger than anyone expected. And at 93, the results speak for themselves. Clint Eastwood's on-screen characters were often loners, tough, mysterious men who didn't talk much about their past. Off-screen, that persona wasn't far from the truth. For years, Clint carefully controlled what the world knew about his personal life. But behind the Hollywood legend was a tangled web of affairs, secret children, and emotional fallout that few ever saw coming. The truth? Clint Eastwood didn't just build a career. He built an entire second life, hidden in plain sight. His first marriage to Maggie Johnson in 1953 was supposed to be the start of something stable. But even from the beginning, Clint wasn't built for domesticity. While the cameras rolled on Rawhide, Clint was quietly involved with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. That affair lasted 14 years and produced a daughter, Kimber, whose existence was kept secret for decades. Clint would later say he didn't even know she was his at first. That claim would repeat itself in later years, almost like a pattern. Then came Lori Murray, the daughter no one knew existed until the 1990s, when she found Clint with the help of a private investigator. Born from a past relationship and placed for adoption, Lori reached out as an adult. Clint welcomed her in, but questions lingered. Did he really not know? Or did he choose not to know? Either way, it was another layer to a story that was getting harder to contain. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Clint's public relationships overlapped with private ones. While still married to Johnson, he began a relationship with actress Sandra Locke. Their chemistry was undeniable on screen, but behind closed doors, things were darker. Locke would later allege that Clint pressured her into abortions and blocked her from pursuing other work. Their relationship ended in lawsuits, accusations, and betrayal. Nothing like the romantic image they projected in films like The Outlaw Josie Wales. But even as that drama played out, Clint had already moved on. A fling with flight attendant Jacelyn Reeves resulted in 2 more children, Scott and Catherine, both raised away from spotlight. At the same time, he was romantically involved with actress Frances Fisher, which led to the birth of Francesca Eastwood. For years, the public only saw pieces of the puzzle. It wasn't until much later that the full picture came into focus, revealing 8 known children from 6 different women, many of whom hadn't even met until they were adults. Some of Clint's children have spoken about him with love and admiration. Others have hinted at distance, resentment, or confusion. Kimberly Eastwood once described feeling ignored and said she had to fight for a relationship with her father. It's a legacy that's complicated, not just by fame but by choices. Clint Eastwood wasn't just a movie star. He was a man who lived in compartments, separating his work, his romances, and his family like scenes from different films. And yet, even in all that chaos, there's something strangely consistent. Clint never pretended to be perfect. He never tried to clean up the mess. He just kept moving forward, leaving behind questions that still don't have clear answers. Maybe that's why people are still so fascinated by him. Because even after all these years, Clint Eastwood remains as hard to pin down as the characters he played. For a man whose personal life had been filled with chaos, secrets, and shattered relationships, Clint Eastwood's later years have taken a surprisingly different turn. Somewhere between the scandals and the lawsuits, something shifted. The man who once kept his world tightly compartmentalized, juggling film sets, mistresses, and secret children, started embracing a kind of quiet peace. Not publicly, not with some grand statement, but in subtle ways that only became clear over time. It started with his relationship with Christina Sandera, a woman far removed from the Hollywood spotlight. A former restaurant hostess, Christina met Clint in 2014. By 2015, they were living together quietly in his Carmel home. There was no red carpet debut, no media circus, just a calm, stable presence that Clint had rarely shown before. And more surprisingly, Christina wasn't some secret lover or hidden chapter. She's been seen with Clint at public events, sitting alongside his children and even his ex-wives. For a man with his kind of history, that level of harmony almost seems surreal. Those close to him say he's different now. Softer, more open, more willing to sit in the stillness rather than run from it. After decades of building walls between his personal and professional lives, he's finally started merging the two. It's not uncommon to see Clint at events with his adult children, smiling, relaxed, even with the ones whose existence he once denied. There's a maturity there, not just of age, but of character. The kind that only comes from facing your own contradictions and choosing, at long last, to stop hiding from them. And then there's Carmel by the sea, not just the place he lives, but the town he once dreamed of settling in, way back when he was a young soldier. It's quiet, surrounded by ocean cliffs and forest trails, far from the chaos of Los Angeles. Clint doesn't need the spotlight anymore. He takes walks, he plays piano, he spends time with conservationists and old friends. And when he's not directing a film, he's often just present, something he didn't always know how to be. What's striking is that Clint Eastwood never reinvented himself in these final chapters. He just stripped away everything that didn't matter. The tough guy image, the secrecy, the constant motion. What's left is something rare. A man who lived hard, made mistakes, outlived nearly all of his peers, and somehow managed to find a kind of balance on the other side of it. He's not perfect. He's not pretending to be. But after everything, the fame, the failures, the fractured relationships, Clint Eastwood has carved out a life that feels, finally, like his own. Clint Eastwood didn't just survive Hollywood. He outlasted it. Through chaos, close calls, and a career that never slowed down, he kept pushing forward. And now, at 93, he's still directing, still surprising us, and still proving that real legends don't fade. They evolve. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite Clint Eastwood moment, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories about Hollywood's most iconic figures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.